The locksmith's pick was scratching at my front door, and I sat in the dark and let it. It was 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve. The house was cold on purpose. I knew exactly who was standing on my porch, because I knew their headlights, and I knew the sound of my brother laughing when he thinks he has already won. My parents were out there. So was Travis. What they carried in their hands that night was worse than a locksmith. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. I'm Charlotte, and I'm 36. This is the story of every Christmas they kept me out of the house, and the one Christmas they tried to break into mine. If you have ever been the empty chair at someone's table, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. For 20 years, there was no room for me at their table. They never once imagined I would be the one deciding who got through the door. And they had no idea who was already inside, sitting in the dark, waiting with me. The first Christmas I remember counting chairs. I was 8 years old. We had a long table with a scratched oak top, and every December my mother set it like a magazine spread. Cloth napkins, the good plates, a centerpiece of pine cones she dusted with fake snow. I counted the places that year because I had learned, even at 8, to count. There was a chair for my father, a chair for my mother, a chair for Travis, who was 4, 2 chairs for my grandparents, 1 for an aunt. And then the table ran out. I stood in the doorway in my church dress and waited for someone to notice the math. My mother noticed me noticing. She did not get angry. That was the thing people never understood about her. She crouched down, smoothed my collar, and gave me a small, sad smile, the kind you give a child who has asked a hard question. "We can only set so many places, honey," she said. Then she handed me a plate and pointed me toward the kitchen. I ate my Christmas dinner that year on a stool by the stove, listening to the laughter in the other room. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a crowded year, too many relatives. I was a smart kid, and smart kids are very good at explaining away the things that hurt them. But the next year there was a chair short again, and the year after that. The relatives changed. The aunts stopped coming, the grandparents passed, and still somehow, the table never had room for me. The shortage was never about chairs. It took me 20 years to understand that. The shortage was always, only, about me. I want to be clear about something, because people always assume the worst. No one ever hit me. No one screamed at me or locked me in a closet or told me I was worthless. If they had, maybe I would have understood it sooner. Cruelty announces itself. Absence just lets you wonder. What I got instead was a careful, quiet kind of nothing. On Christmas morning, the presents under the tree had little name tags in my mother's looping handwriting. Gary, Travis, Mom. Then a few for cousins. I would kneel on the carpet and read every tag twice, the way you reread a test grade hoping it changed. Mine was never there. There would be a gift for me, eventually, usually a practical one handed over later in the day with an apology built into it. "We didn't want to spoil you." In every family photo, I am standing slightly to the side, half out of frame, like the camera couldn't quite decide if I belonged in the shot. I learned to do for myself early. I made my own breakfast at 7. I packed my own lunches. I taught myself to braid my own hair watching my reflection in the toaster. By the time I was 12, I could run a household, and nobody had asked me to. I thought for years that if I just became useful enough, helpful enough, good enough, the table would make room. So I tried harder than any kid should ever have to try. I never once asked myself the real question, the one sitting under all of it like a stone under water. Why was it only me? Why, in a family of 4, did the math only ever fail to include one person? There was one thing in our house nobody was allowed to touch. On my mother's dresser sat a small silver frame, turned slightly toward the wall. Inside was a photograph of a hospital blanket, pale yellow, folded the way you fold something around a baby. There was no baby visible in the picture, just the blanket and my mother's hands. I asked about it once, maybe at 10. My mother took the frame out of my fingers so gently and so fast that I never asked again. "That's not for little hands," she said. And every December, around the middle of the month, she would go quiet. Not sad in a way you could point to, just somewhere else. She would forget to start dinner. She would sit at the window with her coffee going cold. My father would walk softer those days, like the floor might break. I didn't have the words for it then. I only knew that the worst of my mother's distance always came right before Christmas, like a tide that pulled out before it pulled me under. The shortage at the table, the quiet at the window, the frame turned to the wall. I felt, without understanding, that these things were connected. That somewhere in my mother there was a room I had never been let into, and that I had been born standing outside its door. I was a child. I assumed, the way children do, that whatever was wrong was somehow my fault. It would be more than 2 decades before I learned what that yellow blanket meant, and when I finally did, it explained everything and excused nothing. I left the day after my 18th birthday, in the spring of 2007. I had been saving for it the way you save for a flight out of a country at war. Babysitting money, lunch money I didn't spend, a summer of scooping ice cream and a winter of shoveling driveways. By 18, I had $1,100 rolled in a sock and a battered Corolla I'd bought for $400 of it. I packed one duffel bag, clothes, a toothbrush, my high school diploma, and the only photo of myself I owned, where I was actually in the center of the frame, taken by a friend's mother who didn't know our family's rules. Nobody tried to stop me. My mother was at the sink. My father read his paper. Travis, 14 and already untouchable, didn't look up from the television. "Call when you get wherever you're going," my mother said, and that was the whole goodbye. I drove for 3 hours and stopped at a diner off the highway and cried exactly once, hard, in the parking lot. Then I went inside and ordered eggs and made myself a promise over the worst coffee in Ohio. Someday I would have a place of my own, a real one, a place with a door and a lock, and my name on the deed, where no one could ever decide there wasn't room for me. I didn't know how. I just knew I would. I left that house at 18 with one bag and one promise, that someday I would build a place no one could lock me out of. If you have ever packed a bag like that, you already know how this feels. Stay with me, comment, and subscribe. I started with a bucket. That's not a metaphor. I started cleaning houses with a yellow bucket, a box of rags, and supplies I bought at the dollar store. My first client was a tired single mother who couldn't keep up after a double shift. I cleaned her kitchen so thoroughly she cried, and she told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends. For the first year, I slept in the Corolla more nights than I want to admit, parked behind a grocery store with the seat reclined and a blanket I bought at a thrift shop. I showered at a gym I paid $9 a month to belong to. Every dollar that came in, I split into 3 jars: gas, supplies, the someday house. Here is the thing about being the kid who was never quite enough. You learn to never let yourself fail, because you've decided failure is the proof they were right. So I overdid everything. I scrubbed baseboards no one would ever check. I came back to fix things no one had complained about. I worked when I was sick, worked when I was exhausted, worked holidays because holidays paid double, and because I had nowhere I was wanted anyway. It made me very good. It also nearly broke me more than once. By 25, I had hired my first 2 employees. By 28, I had a real office, a logo, and a name: Booth Home Care. We didn't just clean. We watched over people's homes when they traveled, managed their move-outs, cared for the houses of the elderly. I was building a company out of the exact thing I had never been given. A place where everyone belonged, and no one was ever left standing in the doorway, counting chairs. You'd think growing up would have fixed it. It didn't. The first Christmas after I left, I called home from a payphone outside that grocery store. My mother sounded surprised to hear from me, then distracted. There was noise behind her, music and voices. "Is that a party?" I asked. It was. A Christmas party. I had not been told there was one. "Oh, it's just family and a few neighbors," she said in the same gentle voice she'd used over the church dress. We can only set so many places, honey. You understand. I was 19 and 3 hours away, and I still said, "Of course. I understand." I called less after that. Every year or two, I'd try again, around the holidays, hoping the math had finally changed. It never did. Meanwhile, Travis got everything I wasn't getting. His 16th birthday was a catered backyard event. When he graduated, barely. They rented a hall. When he wanted a car, there was a car. When he wanted college money he didn't use, there was college money. I watched all of it from a distance, through the few cousins who still spoke to me, and I told myself I didn't care. I cared. I want to be honest about that, because pretending you don't care is its own kind of lie. I cared so much I built an entire life around proving I didn't need them. But every December, when the radio played the same carols and the stores hung the same lights, I was 8 years old again, standing in a doorway in my church dress, doing the math, coming up one short. The wound didn't close. I just got better at working around it. I should tell you about my brother. Travis was 4 years younger than me and raised in a completely different family, though we shared the same address. Where I learned to do for myself, Travis learned that someone would always do for him. If he broke something, it was replaced. If he failed something, a reason was found. If he wanted something, the answer started at yes, and only moved if my father was tired. He grew up sure of one thing above all else, that the world owed him a soft landing. By the time he was an adult, Travis had become a man who started things and finished none of them. A lawn business that folded, a vending route that vanished, a consulting venture that consisted mostly of a website and a leased truck. Each time it ended, my parents covered the shortfall. They mortgaged a little more of their own security every time and called it helping. I knew most of this secondhand from a cousin named Patty, who couldn't help narrating the family to me over the phone. "Your folks bailed Travis out again," she'd say, like weather. "That boy could fall in a lake and come out with a fish in his pocket." But the fish were running out. The last I'd heard, Travis had married a woman named Megan, and they had bought more house than they could afford and filled it with more things than they could pay for. And underneath all the bailouts, all the soft landings, a debt was quietly building, the kind that doesn't go away when mom writes a check. I didn't know the number yet. I didn't know how desperate he was getting. But I knew my brother. And I knew that a man raised to believe the world owes him will eventually come to collect from whoever is doing best. The last time I saw the whole family together before all of this was at a funeral. My grandmother on my father's side had died, the one relative who used to slip me $10 and call me her second sunshine. I drove 4 hours to be there. I wore black, and I sat in the back. And afterward, at the reception in the church basement, I tried to be part of my family for one afternoon. I refilled the coffee. I cleared plates. I did the things I do, the useful things, hoping useful might finally be enough. Travis found me at the sink. He'd been drinking the cheap funeral wine, and he leaned against the counter and watched me work with a little smile. "You don't have to do that," he said. "The church ladies handle it." "I don't mind," I said. He studied me for a second. Then he said the thing I have never been able to unhear. "You know you don't have to keep showing up, right? Nobody expects you to. You're not really one of us, Charlotte." He said it kindly. That was the worst part. He said it the way you'd tell someone they had spinach in their teeth, a small helpful correction. Then he wandered off to find more wine, and I stood there with a dish towel in my hands, and the water running, and the words settling into me like cold getting into your bones. "You're not really one of us." I dried my hands. I set the towel down. And somewhere in that church basement, between the bad coffee and the folding chairs, I stopped waiting for a chair at their table. If I wasn't really one of them, then their math could no longer break my heart. I would build my own table. And I would decide who sat at it. The years after that funeral were the best of my life, and I built every one of them myself. Booth Home Care grew the way good things grow, slowly and then all at once. By 2025, I had 4 vans, 11 employees, and contracts with half the nice neighborhoods in the county. We had a reputation. When people in those big houses went to Florida for the winter, they handed me their keys without a second thought, because they knew I treated a home like it was sacred. I knew the value of a home in a way the rich families I served never quite did. They had always had one. I had spent my whole life trying to earn one. I paid my people well and on time. I gave Patty's daughter her first job. I learned the parts of business no one teaches you: the contracts, the insurance, the careful paperwork that keeps a small company from being eaten alive. I became, without ever quite noticing it happen, a woman of some means. Not rich the way TV means rich, but comfortable, secure. The kind of secure where you check your bank balance and feel calm instead of sick. My family had no idea. We barely spoke. They still pictured me, I think, as the girl who left with a duffel bag, scraping by somewhere, paying for my pride. They never asked what I did. They never asked how I was doing. And because they never asked, they never saw it coming. They didn't know about the vans, or the employees, or the savings. They certainly didn't know what I was about to do with all of it. I had spent 15 years building the foundation. Now I was ready to build the house. The actual house. The one I'd promised myself in a diner parking lot at 18. I found it in September of 2025, on a street called Maple Hollow. It was the biggest house on the block, a 3-story brick place with a wraparound porch and a turret room, and windows that caught the evening light. It had been built in 1912 and loved and then neglected, and it needed work, the kind of work that scares most buyers off. It didn't scare me. I had cleaned 100 houses like it. I knew its bones. The day I walked through it, I stood in the empty front hall, and I could see it. A long table by the windows. A real one. Set for whoever I chose. I bought it with my own money. Every dollar of the down payment came from that bucket and that truck, and 15 years of refusing to fail. At the closing, I signed my name so many times my hand cramped, and I didn't care, because every signature put that house a little more firmly in my hands. When the lawyer slid the final document across the table, I read the words at the top 3 times. Grantee, Charlotte Booth. Sole owner. Sole owner. I had been a person nobody quite counted, and now there was a legal document that counted me as the only one. I drove to Maple Hollow that night and sat on my own front porch in the dark and let myself feel it. 18-year-old me in the diner parking lot would not have believed it. I had built the place no one could lock me out of. I should have been able to leave it there. A happy ending. But I knew my family. And I knew that the moment they learned what I had, the math at their table was going to change in a way I wasn't ready for. It took about 3 weeks for the news to travel. Patty, of course. She mentioned the house to her sister, who mentioned it to my mother, and the temperature of my entire family changed overnight. My mother called me. My mother, who had not called me on a non-holiday in years, called me on a Tuesday to say she'd been thinking about me and wondered how I was. Her voice was warm in a way I didn't trust, because I had spent 36 years learning the difference between her real warmth and her useful warmth. "I hear you bought a big old place," she said, light as anything. "We'd love to come see it. It's been too long, honey." 2 days later, Travis texted me for the first time in a year. No greeting, just questions. How many bedrooms? What I paid? Whether it was a good investment? And then one that made me set my phone down on the counter and look at it for a long moment. "Who's the house under? Just you?" Just you. I read that little phrase several times. There are questions people ask out of curiosity, and there are questions people ask because they are measuring something. I knew the difference. I'd run a business for 15 years. I knew when someone was sizing up an asset. I didn't answer right away. I made myself a cup of tea, and I thought about the funeral, and the church basement, and you're not really one of us. People don't suddenly remember you exist. They remember what you have. The warmth wasn't for me. It never had been. It was for the house. And every instinct I'd sharpened over a lifetime of watching this family was telling me, very quietly, to be careful. Here is where most people in a story like this make their mistake. They feel the bad feeling, And then they talk themselves out of it. It's just family. I'm being paranoid. They wouldn't. I didn't do that. I had spent my whole life trusting the quiet feeling, because the quiet feeling was the only one that had ever told me the truth. So I called my lawyer. Not a friend, not a cousin. The real estate attorney who had handled my closing, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ruth Calloway. I told her about the calls, the sudden interest, the "who's the house under?" I asked her, point blank, "Can someone take a house out from under you, if they really wanted to?" There was a pause on the line, the kind a professional makes before she tells you something you won't like. "It happens more than you'd think," Ruth said. "It's one of the fastest growing crimes in the country right now." She explained it to me plainly. Deed fraud. Someone forges your signature on a quitclaim deed, a simple form that transfers property. They file it with the county recorder. The recorder does not verify signatures. They just record what's handed to them. And just like that, on paper, your house can appear to belong to someone else. The terrifying part, Ruth said, is who does it. Studies say roughly 9 out of 10 times, it's not a stranger. It's family. Or a friend. 9 out of 10. Family. I sat with the phone against my ear and felt the floor of my stomach drop, not because it was unbelievable, but because it was the most believable thing I had ever heard. "There has to be a way to protect yourself," I said. "There is," Ruth said. "Let me tell you about it." What Ruth told me about was a service the county recorder offered for free, a property fraud alert. You sign up with your name and your property, and from that moment on, the instant anything is recorded against your house, anything at all, you get a notification, a deed, a lien, a transfer. You become the first to know, instead of the last. "It won't stop someone from filing," Ruth warned me. "The recorder still takes whatever's handed across the counter. The signature problem is structural. They can't check it at the window. But you'll know the second it lands. And knowing is everything." I enrolled that afternoon. I went onto the county website, entered my name and the parcel number, and clicked the box. A confirmation email arrived a few minutes later. I printed it. Then I printed something else, the recorded copy of my own deed, the one that said Charlotte Booth, sole owner, with the county's stamp in the corner. I laid them side by side on my kitchen table and I looked at them for a long time. 2 pages on my kitchen table. One said the house was mine. The other promised I'd be the first to know if anyone ever tried to say it wasn't. I didn't tell my family I'd done it. I didn't tell anyone. I just put the 2 pages in a folder, and I put the folder in a drawer. And I kept my voice warm and vague every time my mother called. I let them think I was the same girl with the duffel bag. Because the quiet feeling was still talking to me, and the quiet feeling said, "Don't show them your hand." I sat at my own kitchen table with 2 pieces of paper and a feeling something was coming. If you have ever sensed family circling something you built, you'll want to see what they did next. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The number came to me finally through Patty. It always came through Patty. She called in late October, breathless with the kind of news she pretended to feel bad about sharing. "I shouldn't say anything," she said, which is how she begins everything. Travis was in trouble. Real trouble this time. He had personally guaranteed a business loan, around $90,000, for a venture that had collapsed by summer. The lender wasn't a family member who could be soothed with a holiday dinner. The lender wanted $90,000. He and Megan had fallen behind on the house they rented, and the landlord had started the paperwork to put them out. My parents, Patty said, had finally hit their own limit. They'd been bailing Travis out for 30 years and there was nothing left to bail with. Their savings were thin. Their own house was mortgaged for his last failure. "Your mother's beside herself," Patty said. "She keeps saying the family's going to lose everything." I listened, and I did the math the way I have always done the math. $90,000 of debt. A man raised to believe the world owes him a soft landing. A sister with a paid-for mansion he'd just learned existed. A mother newly, suddenly, warmly interested in seeing that house. The pieces did not arrange themselves into anything good. I hung up with Patty and stood in my big quiet kitchen and understood that the warmth, the calls, the visit my mother kept proposing were not the beginning of a reconciliation. They were reconnaissance. Somewhere 40 minutes away, in a rented house with a landlord at the door, my brother was looking at the one asset in the family with no debt against it and no man in the picture to defend it. And he was getting desperate enough to do something about it. In November, my mother called with an invitation, the first one in nearly 20 years. "We want you to come home for Christmas," she said, and her voice did something it had not done in my whole life. It tried to sound like it loved me. The whole family. Christmas Eve dinner. The way we used to do it. "There's a place for you, Charlotte. There's always been a place for you. There's always been a place for you." I had waited my entire childhood to hear that sentence. And now that it had finally come, I knew, with a certainty that made me a little sick, that it was a lie. You don't set a place for someone you've spent 20 years counting out of the math, not unless you suddenly need them at the table for some reason of your own. I said I'd think about it. Then Travis texted. He'd been texting more lately. Casual, chummy, like we were close. This one was framed as concern. "Hey, with a big old house like that, you gotta keep your important papers safe. Deed, title, all that. Where do you even keep stuff like that? A safe? Fireproof box?" I looked at that message for a long time. He wasn't asking how I was. He was asking where I kept the deed. I didn't delete it. I screenshotted it, with the date and timestamp showing, and I started a folder on my phone. I named the folder something boring so it wouldn't catch anyone's eye, and I began saving everything. Every text, every voicemail, every too warm call. I wasn't paranoid. I was a small business owner who had learned, the hard way, that the most expensive thing you can do is fail to keep a record. They thought they were reeling me in. They had no idea I'd started keeping the receipts. Then Megan got involved, and that changed the shape of the thing. I'd only met my brother's wife a handful of times. She was sharp where Travis was soft, organized where he was scattered. She grew up poor, the kind of poor that never quite leaves you, and she had spent her adult life white-knuckling her way toward safety. I understood her, honestly, better than I understood my brother. I just understood her the way you understand a storm. She called me one evening, friendly, chatting about nothing, and then she steered the conversation somewhere very specific. "You know, Travis and I are thinking about doing a quitclaim between us, for tax stuff," she said, breezy. "Such a confusing process. When you bought your place, did you have to get the signature notarized? Like, does the county actually check who signed it? Or do they just file it?" There it was. Does the county actually check who signed it? That is not a question a person asks for tax reasons. That is a question a person asks when they are mapping out exactly how much they can get away with. I kept my voice easy. I said I wasn't sure, that the lawyer handled all that. That paperwork bored me to tears. I played the woman who didn't pay attention to her own affairs. I could practically hear her relax through the phone. After she hung up, I sat very still. Travis had the desperation and the entitlement. But Megan had the plan. She was the one doing the research, learning the mechanics, testing the locks on the system to see which ones were loose. My brother was going to be the hand. My sister-in-law was the mind. And somewhere in their rented house, the two of them were sketching out a way to take the only thing I had ever built for myself. My mother called again in early December, and this time she said the quiet part without meaning to. We were talking about Christmas, about whether I'd come, and she was working hard to sell me on it. Then she drifted, the way she does, into talking about the house. My house. "It's just so much house for one person," she said. "A place like that, it really ought to be for the whole family. Somewhere everyone can gather. You shouldn't be rattling around in there all alone, honey." And then, gently, fondly, like she was sharing a warm old family, saying, "You know how it is. We can only set so many places." She didn't even hear herself say it. For 20 years that sentence had meant "there's no room for you." Now, turned inside out. It meant something worse. It meant you're the one person too many. It meant a house with my name on the deed was, to her, a table where I was once again the extra chair that ought to be cleared away. I closed my eyes and held the phone and understood the whole thing at last. They weren't asking to visit. They were planning to move in, take over, absorb the house into the family, the way they'd absorbed Travis's debts and Travis's failures, except this time the family didn't have any money left to do it with. This time, they'd have to take it. "I'll let you know about Christmas," I said, calm as a lake. After she hung up, I stood in my front hall by the spot where I'd pictured my long table, and I felt something settle in me, cold and clear and almost peaceful. They were coming for my house. The only question left was how. And I intended to find out before they did anything I couldn't undo. My first instinct was to call Travis and tell him I knew. To say, in plain words, "I see exactly what you and your wife are doing, and it stops now. I'm a fixer. When I see a problem, I want to get in front of it." So I called Ruth instead, to ask how to slam the door before they could open it. What she told me changed my whole approach. "If you confront them now, here's what happens," Ruth said. "They get scared, they back off, and you've got nothing. A warm phone call and your own suspicion. No crime has been committed yet. You can't prosecute a plan." "So I just wait?" I said. "I sit here and let them forge my name?" "I'm not telling you to do nothing," she said carefully. "I'm telling you that the law needs them to actually do it. Forgery isn't real until the forged document exists, and they try to use it. Right now, you have a fraud alert that will tell you the instant they file. If they file, that's a felony, recorded, with their names on it. If they then come to take possession, that's the whole crime, witnessed. You don't stop a trap by warning the animal. You stop it by being ready when it springs." I didn't love it. Every protective instinct in me wanted to act, to control, to fix it before it could happen. But I understood. If I tipped my hand, they'd melt back into the warm-voiced fog and try again later, smarter. If I stayed the clueless girl with the duffel bag right up until the moment they committed the crime in full, I could end it for good. So I made the hardest choice of my life. I decided to let them think they were winning. And I started, very quietly, to get ready. Once I stopped pushing back, they got bolder, the way people do when they think the coast is clear. The texts from Travis changed. They lost the chummy pretense and started carrying an edge. The edge of a man who has already decided how this ends and is just managing me toward it. "You really shouldn't have a place that big to yourself," he wrote one night. "That kind of house should belong to someone who actually takes care of family, not someone who ran off and forgot where they came from." There it was again, dressed up in new clothes. Not someone who ran off. The same song from the church basement. "You're not really one of us, Charlotte," now with a price tag attached. Another night he wrote, "Mom and Dad are getting old. That house could keep this whole family afloat. Think about somebody other than yourself for once." I read these the way I'd read a deposition. I screenshotted everyone. I noted the dates. I watched a man build, in his own words, a complete record of motive, and I let him, because I had learned from Ruth that the best evidence in the world is the kind your target hands you for free. I typed back things that were warm and non-committal. "I hear you. Let's talk after the holidays. It's a lot to think about." Each reply was a little piece of bait, just enough to keep him sure I was softening. Inside, I was anything but. Every cruel, entitled message landed on the same old bruise, the doorway, the church dress, the math that came up short. But the bruise didn't make me weak anymore. It made me certain. And certainty is a very quiet, very patient thing. I closed the folder on my phone, and I waited for the alert I knew was coming. It came on a Wednesday, the 3rd of December, at 4:47 in the afternoon. I was in my office reviewing route sheets when my phone buzzed with an email I'd been bracing for since October. The subject line was clinical and cold, and it stopped my heart anyway. "Property fraud alert. A new document has been recorded against your monitored property." I set down my pen. I opened it slowly, The way you open a door you already know has someone behind it. A new instrument had been recorded with the county that afternoon. Document type, quitclaim deed, parcel, mine. And then the part that made the room go very still and very loud at the same time. Grantor, Charlotte Booth. Grantee, Travis Booth. According to the county's official records, I had just signed my house over to my brother. I had signed nothing. I had been sitting in this office all day with witnesses and a calendar full of meetings. Someone had taken my name, forged it onto a deed, and walked it across the counter at the county recorder. And the county, exactly as Ruth had warned, had simply stamped it and filed it without ever checking whether the signature was real. For one long moment I just looked at the screen. 20 years of being counted out of the math, and now they had used a single sheet of paper to count me out of my own house. I want to tell you I felt rage. I think I should have. What I actually felt was the opposite of rage. It was clarity, pure and cold and almost calm. The trap I had set without quite admitting I was setting it had just sprung its first half. They had committed a felony in writing, with their names on it. Now I had work to do. I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning and requested a certified copy of the recorded deed. I paid the small fee. I waited at a plastic counter under fluorescent lights while a clerk pulled it, and then I held in my hands the document that said my home was no longer mine. I made myself read every line. There was my name, Charlotte Booth, in a signature that was not my signature. Whoever made it had clearly studied one of mine, maybe from an old Christmas card, maybe from a document Travis had access to. They'd gotten the shape of the C right. The rest was wrong in a way only I would notice. The slant of the T, the loop on the H. It was the forgery of someone who'd practiced just enough to fool a stranger and not nearly enough to fool me. Below it sat a notary's stamp and a notary's signature, certifying that I had appeared in person and signed willingly. I had done no such thing. I had never met this notary in my life. I stood there in that quiet office holding the proof of the worst thing my family had ever done to me, and I did not cry, and I did not call my brother to scream at him. I had learned long ago that screaming is what you do when you have no other power. I had other power now. I took out my phone and photographed every page. I noted the recording number, the date, the notary's name. I was already building it in my head, the way I'd built everything, brick by careful brick. Travis thought he'd stolen my house with a piece of paper. What he'd actually done was hand me a felony with his fingerprints all over it, and he had no idea I already knew. That afternoon, I walked into the police station and filed a report. I sat across from a detective named Ray Foster, a heavy-set man with patient eyes who had clearly seen a lot of families do a lot of terrible things to each other. I laid it all out, in order, the way I lay out everything. The deed in my name, the recorded forgery, the notary I'd never met, the texts from Travis, dated and screenshotted, Megan's call about whether the county checks signatures, my mother's sudden warmth, and the $90,000 of debt behind it. Detective Foster listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he sat back and said, "Ma'am, in 20 years, I have rarely seen a victim walk in this organized. I run a business," I said. "I keep records." He told me what I was dealing with was serious. Forgery of a deed, filing a false instrument with the county, these were felonies, the kind that carry real prison time, not slaps on the wrist. He told me Ruth could file something called a notice of fraudulent deed to flag the record and begin unwinding it in court. And then he said the thing I'd been circling toward since the alert first buzzed. A forged deed on paper is one thing, Foster said, but it's stronger, much stronger if they try to act on it, if they show up to take the house.